Now I have the great pleasure of sitting opposite Roisin Bugler. And Roisin, I'm going to tear straight into it. We're here to not pussyfoot around.
Would you ever?
No, we'll get right to the core, imagination. What? Now, this is more or less the very same question I asked a certain Ivan Brennan, who was here a few weeks ago. Imagination, what is it, its importance, and what its importance has been for you or to you?
Yeah.
No, good luck.
I suppose to say it's more than a few weeks ago. It was in November, and at that time, Ivan, as you know, is involved with the Slivakti drama group.
Yeah.
My good husband is the director this year, and I suppose it's a nice symmetry. Then we're coming full circle. They've just qualified for the All Ireland, and I'm bringing up the tail end then to keep talking about the imagination and yeah.
Was it something that kind of grabbed you, or what would you say, like say when you were a young child, what were you observing? What kind of, what were the things that impinged on you?
So I grew up in Mount Shannon on a farm and out of the village, you know what I mean? So, and I grew up with brothers, I don't have any sisters, so a lot of my playtime was by myself and kind of using my imagination maybe, and you know, that was the stimulation. There wasn't...
Had you favourite places to go or favourite colours or anything like that in that line?
We, I suppose, you know, the way, like, back then, in the 80s, you could just go out and roam wild a bit and just outside a good bit. And
well, the roaming wild that's a big one, isn't it?
It is a big one.
It is a big one, yeah. I mean, even recently, I think you were telling me you were up in Bohat pulling rushes, was it?
Don't be telling any...
No, don't be saying that out loud. No. But I mean, that in itself is it's an indication of you. It's second hand to you. I'm going to throw a bit of a quote here I have from recent times, and it's by a certain Mr. Einstein. I often say, you know, start at a low bar and go from there. You know, Einstein, what did he know? But anyway, he said imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Now, you've got 1 minute to tell me, what does that mean? Or to you, I'll say what I think it means. That there's more than that. Head knowledge only gets you so far. Black and white thinking is kind of very, very linear.
I think
gets you into kind of maybe argumentative stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas doing more, like bringing more into the heart space or into kind of more holistic,
more empathy with people and
yeah.
others. And I suppose when I think of imagination, another word that crops up for me is creativity. And for me, I went to school in Inishcaltra National School, and our good Jim Collins was our teacher there, and he really, from an early age, encouraged us to think creatively. And I think when you think creatively, you know, you can think in a constructive way, you know, that you have better problem solving. You know, you think outside the box. And, you know, he had us doing writing poems and art and outside gardening and all kinds of, like, the curriculum wasn't just the Irish, English and maths, you know, there was a lot more to it. I think that was a great foundation.
Yeah. You
know, to go on and express. I think when you express yourself creatively, like, you open up another side to...
And no judgment. Again, I think I'm going back to the interview with Ivan. She brought that up a few times, and I kind of linking with that a good bit myself. Not to judge what you're doing, or not to have it judged, I suppose, especially at a young age.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I suppose sometimes, you know, when you're saying, you know, myself and yourself are both involved in a writers group, and
there's a lot of judging goes on there. I don't know, in my own head anyway.
But and of course, just to mention, Carol carried that group, Carol McNamara, for a long time, and so we're keeping it going as best we can. And I think we don't attach, like, sometimes with these groups, it's like, well, have you published this and have you done that, and where's your productivity? And you know, you don't always have to have this label of productivity about it. Maybe, and I think as well, we've talked a bit about it. You know, where's the fun?
Yes.
And I see
it would be great to be able to enjoy it, wouldn't it?
It would, without being so angst-ridden. And I think you know, sometimes we forget that, and it is important.
Yeah. I think Donald McCann, you know, the actor, he was asked once to do a film by some Italian director. It was on foot of him doing The Steward of Christendom in Dublin, and I think the director had told some world media anyway that McCann was the best actor in the world at that particular time. So McCann being asked what was it like to be described as the world's best actor, I think the reply was something like Yeah, that's great. But what about the effing responsibility? So that kind of thing, yeah, to enjoy it is
Yeah, and
a big key, isn't it?
The two girls, and they, like yesterday, so, I just mentioned when I grew up, there was a freedom. And to a certain point, there still is in a rural area like that. And they were there in the playground last night.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
And they just love playing. They love having fun. And, that feeds into other creativity as well.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be structured.
It doesn't have to be, although speaking of structure, we do have a little project coming up.
Go on.
There's a scheme called the Creative Ireland Partnership. And for the last couple of years, I've been very lucky to get funding for that. Yeah. And the theme of it is to encourage people to be creative culturally and, to get people to tap into their own creativity.
Yeah.
And so I applied for it, if you cast your mind back to January, in the aftermath of Storm Éowyn. And when I apply for these things, I never know if they're going to come to fruition. So I say to the people, look, I have this idea. What do you think? And so we have Aileen Dunn, who is a ceramic artist, and she lives in Oak House, which is the greenhouse at the bottom of the Hostel Hill, Shannon. And then it's going to be pottery and poetry. Two writers, Niamh Toomey, who's originally from East Clare, and she's doing her PhD in Belfast, but she's coming down from Belfast and she's going to do a workshop in Shannon next week. And then Kerry Darty, who's originally from the north but now lives here, and we'll do another, and we'll see what comes out of that. And we're going to set our words in stone. We're going to write, and then we're going to put them onto these ceramic tiles, and that'll feed in then to the Shannon Arts Festival for an event there. And I'm looking forward to it.
Well, there's an imaginative thing. You have a great, because knowing you go on and you apply. You're the one who takes on to, set the ball rolling. What drives you on to apply for things or to get involved in that kind of? Because I think I'd be too lazy to start with. Anyway, that'd be at the beginning. Yeah, go on.
I'm a kind of more of a follower than a leader. It's kind of a reluctance in one person. Do I really want to bring this on myself? But I do, because I have a great interest in how people connect. Like you talked about the hurlers were here, and they had a great connection. Talking about 30 years ago, and they still have that.
Yeah.
And my chosen
community is important. Yeah,
absolutely important. So, and I think
community can be a bit tricky sometimes, Roisin. But yes, it's worthwhile. Yes, go on, keep talking.
The way if everything is so smooth always, maybe that's not.
Yeah, good.
So it's good to have the different interests, and I'm not saying that isn't frustrating, but sometimes good things come out of that too.
Well, it's good to have difference, because we can only, on a political level, I suppose, here we go again, look across a certain water and we can see where difference isn't allowed, or that kind of thing.
That's it. And the way people say, that's what you voted for, and that's what, and like half of the electorate didn't, you know what I mean? And I know people who are there and who are really hurting, you know what I mean? It's terrible, really. And all we can do, I suppose, is strive on and try not to get swamped by that, because it can get sucked into the whole.
Well, of course, it's easy to throw it onto one particular country, but it's a worldwide thing. I mean, look at so many organisations when creative or kind of different kinds of strains of thought aren't allowed. That's dangerous.
I think it is dangerous, and then from a media point of view, and that's what I love about community radio as well. We have a little, bit like you can play the music that mightn't get it on a commercial radio station, or you can, have the opinions without trying to, go totally overboard. But yeah.
In your own creative endeavours, if you don't mind me asking, do you kind of get really absorbed that it would take up the whole day with you, or you be kind of gone off in flights of fancy and you kind of, forget to comb your hair or whatever it is, or drive the car in over a ditch or something?
Yeah.
Would you have any kind
looks like I got dragged through a ditch, but anyway. No, I suppose I'm busy in that I've young children, and I thought, when I started writing, they were small, and I said, oh God, no, when they get bigger now I'll have more time, and the opposite is true. You're taxiing them here, there and everywhere. But I think, the way you could say, well, I'll do all this when I retire, but you mightn't actually get that opportunity. So it is busy, you know what I mean? And I don't always find the space or the time, but I think as well, if you have groups and the kind of like the writers group or like the arts festival, whatever, that you kind of have to show up,
Yeah.
And then, actually, the flow of
Deadline.
words, we have a flow of words tomorrow, which Your Good Self are featuring as well.
go on.
To try and keep it moving and don't assume that nothing is a given. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You mightn't have that. You think you have time, but maybe you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, good. When did you actually start the writing? Ron?
Well, I suppose I used to write a bit in school, and then didn't really do much, here and there. And then it's funny, actually, it comes back to hurling again, Pat. Back in 2013, do you remember the All Ireland was later, and the cup came back to to Whitegate, to the club, and it was a late October. It was dark, and Brendan Bugler, my namesake, made a speech that night, and everyone was elated because it was just such an achievement, and he says. And I'm not. He said, like, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he said, I'm not specifically talking about hurling, but if you want something and you set your mind to it, it is achievable. And at the time, I was kind of dabbling a bit in writing. I says, God, I just loved what he said, and I said, I'm going to kind of maybe concentrate and, set a goal and take it from there.
Yeah.
Kind of about finding one's voice, isn't it? So many of us are hesitant, I suppose, around that. And again, but I think the judgmental thing is what comes into it.
Yeah, and if you can get over that hump and maybe it's not all. I suppose we do maybe sabotage ourselves a little bit sometimes, but just let it rip.
And I suppose again, you might have to be writing stuff that's not great sometimes, but that
that's all part of it.
Yeah, it's all part of it,
and that doesn't have to go anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we kind of have. There's an obsession with it has to be so good and perfect and all the rest. And
something to do with being. I remember hearing Tommy Tiernan one night on the radio or the television saying, "It's a desperate thing to be going on with trying to be approved. Just going up on a stage trying to be."
Looking for approval.
Which I suppose is part of it.
Well, it is part of it. I mean, you don't want to be making an idiot out of yourself, I suppose.
Yeah,
but at the same time,
And you kind of have to make an idiot out of yourself. So there's all that. Anyway.
Sure, when you have two idiots together, it doesn't survive.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Go forth and Egypt him. I don't know why I was going to mention this, but I'll try and make it brief. I had written down here, did you ever hear of James Joyce's short story, A Painful Case? This often struck me as a great kind of metaphor for imagination. He had written as one of the short stories in Dubliners, A Painful Case. And A Painful Case was, with the other short stories, sent then for foolproofing to his brother, who was in an Austrian, some kind of an internment camp at the time, Stanislaus. And he used to check with Stanislaus to see were these, stories, were they up to the scratch and that. But there was a fellow from Dublin who was in, I think it was the First World War, so the Austrians anyway had interred Stanislaus. I suppose he was on the English side. I think he might have been in the English army. But this other fellow who was probably in the English army as well was with Stanislaus in internment. He was from Dublin. And the case, or the story, A Painful Case, refers to, I think it was in Sandymount, there was a tram hit a woman. And this is how Joyce wrote the story. But hit the woman and killed her. And anyway, the story was sent, as I said, to Stanislaus, his brother in Austria, in the internment camp, the camp who gave it to this other fellow to have a look at. And the other fellow says, I can't read that, that's too painful to read it. Because it turns out that this fellow knew the woman.
Oh, yeah, it's too close to the bone.
But too close to the bone. Joyce had written this story years before the actual real happening. And it often struck me, I know, there's a bit of a caveat here. Mr. Joyce was a bit of a genius, but that kind of thing where something you go into spaces. Now that can be a plus and a minus to that. You have to watch yourself. But isn't it amazing that he kind of saw something in maybe the creative unconscious, if you want to call it, that was maybe a premonition of what came afterwards. But he had it down to nearly the detail.
Wow.
And. I don't know how I was fascinated by that, I suppose, when I came across it, but also kind of a bit, want to be a bit wary, I suppose, of some of it. And then you can start talking about how, some people have used, just mentioning war, I suppose, go to the next World War, the Nazis, how they have used certain creativity for evil or for even taking, as I understand it, say the imagination of you. There's swastika.
Yeah.
I think that was originally a Buddhist symbol, a religious symbol. Imagine taking that and kind of spinning it into
something very
a kind of,
yeah.
So how it can, anyway, why am I bringing that up? But something about how it's wonderful and it can be something.
Yeah, but is there like a bigger dimension that we're drawing?
Yeah, there are
down
different
to
dimensions,
inspiration
that
from?
kind of thing,
Yeah.
So, on that note, is there anything else you want to, I don't even know, is there anything else in that would speak to you about how I suppose important it is really, or how something about how transportative it can be, to take people, even listen to a piece of music, how you can be transported. How, I suppose, with Joyce, he used to talk about, I think, was it the haunted inkwell, he called it, like when the Holy Spirit was in the haunted inkwell, that you dip into this dark scribbling, and you could be on all flights of fancy, I suppose, in some ways, but you could also be taken to quite wonderful places for yourself.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Just mind how you go.
Mind how you go, one way or another, yes. So anyway, that's my tuppence halfpenny on that. Is there any other thing you want to promote besides? Have you brought a poem of yourself? Of course, of your own, I should say. Of course you have.
Poem, yeah.
At least one, I hope. Go on.
I have one, yeah.
Lovely.
So it's a poem, I suppose, about connection and how maybe trying to hold connection, and then when you lose connection, and there's a few layers in it anyway. And it's about creativity as well as about making bread and breaking bread.
Oh yes, yeah, I think I know this one. Very good.
So it's called Breaking Bread. Mm-hmm. When my grandmother died, my mother and her sister tried to hold connection, keep the home hearth burning. We gathered on Sunday evenings to visit their unwed brother, sat around the table, drank cups of loose-leaf tea, chatted about the news of the parish and the state of the nation, Charlie and Garrett, and what the March was giving. When the table cleared and before we headed home, my aunt took down my grandmother's baking bowls. She had no need of measure, judged ounces by the eye, a mound of Odlum's flour, added bran, a dash of salt, a hefty pinch of soda, raised the mix in adulation, an invocation to rise well and sustain. Buttermilk poured from an earthen jug, mixed and formed a dough, turned out until a table dusted white. She shaped it round and took a knife, cut a cross along the top, slid it in the oven on a butter wrapper paper with instruction to her brother to watch it, and release it from the range. When tapped upon the bottom, the sound returned was hollow. Wrap it in a cloth and set upon the sill for the days ahead. And as we left, we bid farewell and blessed ourselves from the holy waterfront. And my uncle told us, mind the road, safe home. But with rolling years he grew other, told them not to bother come around, declared the days of roaring fires were gone. An invocation broken across unloving sisters. The feeling felt was hollow, disappointment left unspoken, breaking bread together done. So,
thank you, Roisin.
Thank you, Anthony.
Was it to rise well and sustain?
Yeah. So I used to watch my aunt, and she'd make the bread, and it was a beautiful. And I always wanted to get it down on paper, and she did it with such ease. And to get the air in, you'd have to rise up the flour. But there's a kind of nearly like a communion in that. You know what I mean? And yeah, she made great bread.
Not to be said for that, to rise well and sustain.
That's it.
Anyway, may you rise well and sustain.
And
going
peace be
forward
with you too.
Thanks, Roisin.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks, Grant.
Are you involved, just before we go, are you involved in Slieve Archie?
No, just on a kind of a supportive stay at home and mind the children.
Oh, yeah, you're not involved in the, yeah.
I know, yeah, well, and whatever, if they need any.
There's huge work involved in.
There's a lot of work involved, and they put huge work in, and they were well supported, and if they're coming up again, so we'll get them over the line, and they'll find out tomorrow when their date is for the Ireland Intermarriage.
Yeah, it's marvellous. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
And they have 2 more nights coming up.
2 more nights in Scariff before they head off to Claremorris.
Yeah, that's marvellous. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, thanks, Roisin, for coming in to us today and having a chat. And
I'm sure we'll be talking to you again.
Yeah, hopefully.
All the best.
Okay, thanks, Roisin.